Hello and welcome everyone. I am Chris Hyams, CEO of Indeed, and welcome to the next installment of Here to Help. This is our look at how Indeed has been navigating the global impact of COVID-19. Today is August 31st. We're on day 181 of global work from home. And for those of you that know Indeed, you know that our mission is to help people get jobs. This is what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's what keeps us up at night. And we also have 5 core values. These are the fundamental ideas that guide us on that mission. They represent what we believe, and they help us make decisions about our products and about our business. Now, August is Values Month here at Indeed, and we've taken our 5 episodes throughout this month to explore each of our core values. As a quick refresher, our first value is that we put job seekers first. Indeed is a marketplace. We connect job seekers and employers, but in every decision that we make, the first question that we ask is what is best for the job seeker? Our second value is pay for performance. And from the very start, our business model was based on this idea of we want to get paid only when we're delivering value to our customers. This is great. It ensures that we're aligned with our customers, but it really helps us stay aligned with that first value and with job seekers. Value that we're delivering to our customers really means that we're connecting them to job seekers. And so if we're getting paid when we are doing things that are good for job seekers, then that means that there will never be a conflict between making money and doing what's best. The next value is that we are data-driven. And this really follows from the pay for performance one. If we want to get paid for performance, we have to have a way to measure that performance. And this is something that really permeates every aspect of our business. And today we're going to be talking about our next core value, which is innovation. Innovation, probably the most overused and misunderstood term in all of business. For us, the idea is pretty simple, and we think it follows directly from these previous values. If we have a business model that's based on pay for performance, if we're only getting paid when we're delivering value, then the only way for us to grow our business is to deliver more and more value. So innovation for us, this idea of continuous improvement, this is really an imperative. We have one other core value, which is inclusion and belonging. Based on the way our weeks rolled out, we actually ended up covering that earlier in the month. But it was a great discussion. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, please go and check out that episode. Today is all about innovation, and today is the end of our exploration of our values this month, and it's really a great place to wrap things up. For this conversation, I'm really excited to be joined by Connie Cheng, who is a product manager for Indeed Incubator. And Connie has only been with Indeed for a few years, but her experience here truly exemplifies what we mean by innovation. So Connie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, let's start the way that we always start here, which is just a quick check-in. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I mean, I'm certainly grateful for my situation and my position. But I mean, you said earlier it's been like 181 days, and I can confidently say that I'm still not entirely used to the new state of the world, and finding ways to adjust. Yesterday, I went to a drive-in comedy show, which was really obscure. And instead of, because they can't hear you laughing because you're in your car, so they had you flashing your headlights whenever you liked a joke. And it was kind of a surreal experience, but also pretty optimistic in the different ways that people are getting creative with trying to find safe activities to do and still enjoy each other's presence.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So let's start. You joined Indeed during the summer of 2017 as part of a pretty unique program that we have here called Indeed University. And actually the next class of Indeed University is starting up today. So it's actually really great timing. Let's start. Can you explain a little bit about Indeed University and how that helped start your career here at Indeed?
Yeah, definitely. So, whenever I was pitched Indeed University before I joined Indeed, it was kind of like there's two ways to describe it. It's a 3-month long hackathon, or it's kind of, like a mini incubator for new grads. And for me, it was so compelling because I had spent most of my time in college realizing that the thing that I love to do was basically going out and doing the job and taking on internships and figuring out what was a fit and what wasn't a fit, and learning how to do the job by doing the job. And that's pretty much what Indeed University felt like. And so the idea of starting my first 3 months in like my first grown-up career and actually being able to build something from scratch with other new grads who are in the same position that I was so exciting. There's not a lot of places, I don't know of any other places that give you a really cool opportunity like that. And so Indeed University gave me my first taste in what it would be like to be on an incubator type platform. And then, of course, after Indeed University, I decided I really wanted to keep living that life for the next 3 years. So since then, I've just been on Incubator, and all of those have had a huge impact in how I've been thinking about working and innovation.
And for clarity, for anyone that's not from Indeed, essentially what we do is we take all of our new college grads in product and engineering, data science and design, and throw them together for 12 or 13 weeks and tell them to build new things. And so we'll get a little bit into the experience that you had there. Before we get into that, and since we're spending this episode really focused on innovation, can you talk a little bit about just that word in terms of what it means at Indeed and kind of how we define it and how we think about it?
Yeah, so I think in Indeed, one of the things that since I've been here, it's very clear that we know that things are constantly changing, and we're definitely seeing that now more than ever. But even before the pandemic, there was always this understanding that the industry is always changing, and we need to continuously evolve with it and take risks and push those boundaries. And so I think that means being able to take risks and go for the fences, but also when you're doing that, using data to drive understanding of when you're going and taking those risks and running experiments and evolving, knowing whether or not that's the right direction to be going and whether or not you should keep doing that. And then I think the other thing that's been super important has been also being okay with and accepting and even embracing when failure inevitably happens, knowing that you're taking these risks, and a lot of times, maybe even most of the time, things aren't going to work out, but that you're okay with that as part of the process.
So you graduated college, you came to Indeed and went from, one environment, which was the school environment, into what was a business environment, but because it's this sort of incubator-like thing, it's probably a little different than most people starting out their careers. How did the experience in Indeed University, how was that different from your experiences in college? And how did that, get you thinking about where you were going and what success looked like?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of my time in college and before college thinking what I needed to do to be successful was get really good grades and win competitions, and this perception that success was this very linear path. I just needed to keep doing things well and growing and hitting all of the goals that I set, which I very quickly had to unlearn that it's okay not to always hit your goals. And so the cool thing about Indeed University was since day one, there was this messaging around, you're here to learn what it's like to work at Indeed, and you're here to take risks. And here is this awesome opportunity for you to take risks and know that you'll still have a job if it doesn't pan out. And so giving us the freedom to go and explore these problem spaces where at the end of the day, if what we learn is this isn't something that is worth continuing, and this is something that we gave it a shot and we captured this data, we ran these experiments, and we should shut it down, then that also is successful, which I think was not something I had learned in college and going through school. And so having that experience right out of the gate, joining Indeed, felt like a really good rude awakening in which I could start to get a lot more comfortable and thinking in a way where I can take these risks and be in an environment where I know I'll be supported.
I remember very well your Indeed University project that you ended up working on. Can you talk a little bit about what that project was and what happened during the program and sort of how that idea sort of came up and evolved over time?
The problem that I was really focused on at that time was trying to deal with people who get interview anxiety, because I get a lot of anxiety when it comes to stuff like going in and interviewing for a job where it feels like the stakes are really high. And so I was really excited to work on, I don't remember if that was when virtual reality first became more mainstream with consumers, but in my head, I was like, how cool would it be if you want to practice interviews and you could do that in the comfort of your own home, but feel like you're in an interview environment and kind of desensitize you to that environment. And so the idea that I had pitched to the other IUers to try and join my team was, hey, let's build out this app where we would use Google Cardboard, something that was more accessible, and people could put it on their phones and feel like they're actually doing a real interview-ish. And so in the first few weeks, we actually built out this VR app. I remember getting a 360 camera and working with some people to record like this interview experience. And we went to Job Club out in Austin, where Indeed volunteers and helps people who sign up to look for jobs and walks them through that process. And so at the end of a few Job Club consultations that we would have, we would then ask them to try out the experience and get some of their feedback on what they thought. And we pretty much consistently heard, oh, this is cool, but I feel a little bit nauseous. It feels a little bit weird. I don't know if I would use this at home. And so we got some resounding feedback like, okay, we definitely swung for the fences. We did something that was very different and out there. And we learned that wasn't necessarily the best fit for a lot of the people who would be looking for jobs and practicing interviews. So after that experience, we pivoted to something that was a lot less immersive, but still very accessible, and introduced just something that was more focused on, you can watch a video online and we'll record your experience and give you a transcript of your response, and experimented by using people who are interviewing at Indeed to look at how that performed and what their response was on how it felt. And so there was a lot of stuff early on that we learned there, right? Like taking those risks, getting feedback super early on, and using that data to drive our decision as to whether or not we pivoted. And so I'm really glad that we did that, and we did something that was really strange and exciting and fun, but also that we kind of learned pretty quickly, oh, this isn't working out. We need to try something else and we need to adapt. So that was also a great learning experience, because it was failing early on and then learning from that to then make these decisions and adjust. And then that really kind of set the stage for the rest of the time that I've been at Indeed.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week when we were getting ready for this discussion here, and that was one of my favorite projects that year at Indeed University. And I have two different kinds of favorite projects, and I think they might be a little counterintuitive for some people. But one is the one where people try something that's totally crazy and it just completely fails. And especially though, when the team like yours recognized, because you were using data and thinking rationally and saying, oh, this isn't working at all, we need to try something else. Because that's just such a clear reflection of how the real world actually works. You know, most people have this fantasy that there's this lone crazy person sitting in a room and they have this amazing idea, and then they go and just do something and it changes the world. And there's a whole lot of mess that leads up to that, like the one idea that turns out to be the right one. My other favorite kind of project, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is the one where when it is first pitched, to me sounds like a completely stupid idea and turns out to be really amazing. And so we have plenty of experience with both of those. But so you went from Indeed University, so you had this sort of 3-month hackathon, or this 3-month, introduction to the incubator concept, and ended up then graduating from that and joining the Indeed Incubator. So for those people that don't know, can you explain a little bit about the Indeed Incubator and how it works, and what made you want to go that direction?
Yeah, so the way that I hear it often described is it's like a startup within a larger company. We are spinning up new products And we also use the concept of funding rounds or metered funding to determine whether or not the products that we spin up, we should continue working on them, for how much longer we should continue working on them, or whether or not we should shut them down, which I think is a really pivotal part of the incubator process. And so products get pitched, and if there is a sponsor who is typically now a GM that decides that they're interested in it, they'll sponsor it, and they act as like an advisor to help you take down any barriers that you might run into, or to help just provide advice or insight into the various things that you're working on without actually driving the decisions for you. And then we go and take the product, and we take the amount of time that we have, and we decide what are the goals that we're trying to achieve. What is it that we're trying to show to demonstrate that Indeed should continue investing in these products. And then at the end of our funding round, actually presenting and saying, here are all the different experiments that we ran. Here's how those experiments performed. Here's how this could mean for Indeed's ecosystem as a whole, and why we think it's worth continuing to pursue for another 6 months or for another year. Or there are also times where we take what we've learned and we say, we ran these different experiments, and what we learned is like, actually Indeed should not continue to pursue this product because there just isn't a great business reason based off of the research that we've done, the experiments that we've ran. And so we get a lot of the best of both worlds of being at a startup kind of environment, but also at a larger company where if something gets shut down, we don't have to worry about losing our jobs. We just go and start something new, and we get to leverage a lot of the resources that Indeed has. That's very powerful in allowing us to move really quickly and get results. And so I really loved the format of IU in moving fast and taking these long shots and using data to drive the decisions. And so when I learned that there was an incubator team, I think at the time it might have even been called Labs and had just started being called Incubator, it was like, I need to go talk to the people there and see if they'll take me on, because I have worked at or I'd interned at startups before and at large companies, and there were elements of both that I loved, and the idea that I could get the marriage between the two at Indeed, I was so excited for it. So I think I immediately chased down Brendan and Dan and asked if I could join the team, and so that's how I ended up from IU to Incubator.
Yeah, and we're going to spend some more time talking about the incubator and your experiences there. But one of the things that really was the inspiration for this was just looking at how when companies go like Indeed from being a small startup that's scrappy and you don't have money and you don't have any time and you're incredibly focused to getting bigger and more successful, it often gets harder to continue to be innovative because you develop these processes and these ways of thinking and acting that are very different than what got you to that first thing that worked. And so we really just tried to create an environment within the company that number one, recognize that you need to actually have some kind of urgency, and so the time limit turned out to work really well. We start with this, you get 3 months, and at the end of 3 months the project is dead, unless you can pitch and get more funding and keep going. And so that urgency that when there's 4 people, eating ramen and living together in an apartment and working and trying to make some money, that's really helpful for innovation. It also, though, I think that time limit makes it really easy to say yes to a lot of things that do sound crazy. Because if the answer is we're only going to try it for a few months, then, virtual reality interview prep, sure, let's give it a shot and see what happens. So what I'd love to do is, you've been involved in a number of really, to me, really interesting projects through your career at the incubator. So let's talk a little bit about the process itself and the process of innovation. So how does that work in terms of new ideas getting pitched and getting funded?
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things is anyone at the company can pitch an idea. And I spent over a year working with this really awesome woman who worked in sales, Brittany, who pitched an idea and it got funded and we worked on it together. And so I think one thing that I've learned from that process is you have all these different people working in these different departments who get a glimpse into various problems that product managers or other people working on problems don't necessarily think of. And so I love seeing the pitches that come in from across the company, and the things that I've never thought of as like, ooh, that's a problem, because I don't get to see that problem. And so there's a lot of, I guess, the word is like the internal version of intrapreneurship involved. And so when these ideas get pitched and they get funded, then you have this team that rallies around you with engineers and UX designers and marketing and global product commercialization to help bring that product idea to life and take it to market and see what happens and take that risk. And so it's this, I guess, internal product accelerator. And as we had talked about earlier, then you're met with these funding rounds where you generally start with 3 months. And then at the end of 3 months, you share what you've learned and what you want to do to continue further, if you should continue further. And then over time, over the life of that product, there's ultimately 3 different things that can happen, in which the first one I had already said, where you can get more funding or you can get acquired by a different business department within Indeed. We've seen that with hiring events getting acquired by enterprise. And then the other thing is that you don't get any more funding either for whatever reason based off of the stuff that you learn, and then you wind down the project. But a lot of times, in every instance with any product that gets shut down, there's a lot of value that comes out of it because there's something that's learned. Oftentimes, other teams can benefit from those learnings and will take on those learnings. And you're also proving, hey, we tried this thing that sounded risky and we learned, okay, cool. Let's move on to the next thing. This is not something we should continue to work on. And so, yeah, that's the general structure of how things work at Incubator, which allows us to be able to sort of look at things more objectively to drive those decisions. And I mean, because we're using data to drive whether or not we should continue those, it's not like a personal thing anymore. It's having that intellectual honesty and saying, awesome, what came from it, and is this worth pursuing?
Yeah. So one thing, that may be implicit, but just for clarity, again, for those not familiar with it, the incubator, the way that I think of it is there's sort of 2 kind of essential components to it. One is this model, this what you described as the metered funding, where people come in and pitch, and we have timelines, and then there's this ownership and autonomy that comes with it. So we don't come in and micromanage. That the team, Brittany, who pitched Text to Apply, was essentially the CEO of that little startup. And we were, I was meeting with her as a board member regularly and giving feedback, but it was really up to Brittany and you and the team to make decisions. So that's the sort of the model. The other piece is this sort of container for operations. So we have a separate team where when we have these ideas, they sort of live in this incubator group. So they're not competing for time or resources with the rest of the business that's working on other things that are mission critical. And it's not like there's no innovation going on in the rest of the business, but it's really great to have this complete separation. And with that is the team. And so we actually have a dedicated set of engineers, product managers, designers, data scientists, growth marketers. You sort of described this, but so we have this dedicated team of people like you who just work on incubator projects. And when a new one gets spun up, we see who's available. And when one gets shut down, then you move on to something else. And that's allowed us to operate at a scale. The last time I looked, and it's I'm sure it's gone up since then, but between Indeed University and Indeed Incubator, we've launched over 130 new businesses within Indeed over the last 5 or 6 years. And that's pretty remarkable. So let's talk some specifics here. So your first project with the incubator after you left Indeed University was Indeed Crowd. And this is another one of my favorites. So can you talk a little bit about Indeed Crowd?
Yeah, this was a really cool one. And I'm actually really glad I got to start off my incubator experience working on that. It was very interesting experience and kind of a wacky idea. So this was started by two product managers, Dan and Lucas, before I had joined. And I kind of came in probably when it was around for 6 months or a year already. The general premise of Indeed Crowd was looking at this new wave of crowdsourcing that was happening in tech with Uber and I guess I don't remember if we had called it that, but it was kind of like the Uber of recruiting. Like we will try to get anyone who feels like they can refer candidates to jobs and anyone can do it. And they can get compensated if someone gets an interview, they can get compensated if someone gets hired. This general business where you typically have these recruiting agencies that work. We were seeing, can we crowdsource that, which is why it was called Crowd. And so one of the things that we learned was people would do it. People would refer candidates, sometimes even people that they didn't know, and supply a resume and ask them to apply to this job that they thought they would be a good fit for. And people also got hired. It was a really cool thing to see that that you could actually bring this to life and that people would do these things. And ultimately, it did get shut down because there were just a lot of challenges. There was a lot of turnover, and while we learned that people could refer candidates and those candidates would get interviews and would get hired, that it was just challenging to do, given that you would have to have this constant source of people that you know who are looking for jobs in these various industries. But it was just definitely one of those swing for the fences out there ideas that like we've been talking about. And then Crowd was actually the birth of the one-click apply, which was something that I know that Hire used for a while. And so that was the other thing that was really cool, was even though the product itself didn't continue to live on, there was something that came of the product that another business within Indeed saw that and said, oh, you're seeing a lot of great success. You're seeing really great, like when someone says they've been referred and that they can just click and apply because their resume has already been submitted, that conversion rate is really high. And so I know that Hire used that for a bit. And I think that was another example of having something live on even when the product itself gets shut down, and there was another team that absorbed those learnings.
Crowd also illustrates one of my favorite ideas, which is that, ideas are easy. It's actually doing something where, the magic happens. So Crowd was an idea of mine like 6 years ago that I talked to a whole bunch of people about, and no one really got excited about. And then when sort of Lucas came along and pitched this idea, and to some degree, there's there are new ideas, and then there's old ideas, but that they're new because we haven't done them before. The difference between actually saying, "Hey, this is great, somebody should do it," and going and doing it, it's sort of the passion and the drive of the person who just wants to prove everyone else wrong. And it makes me think of that scene in The Social Network where it's during the trial, and the Winklevoss twins are trying to claim that they invented Facebook, and Zuckerberg says essentially, if you had invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. And so like the coming up with the ideas are cheap, basically. And no matter how smart anyone is and how much they can get attached to the brilliance of their ideas, it means nothing without execution. So it was great that we actually went and tried to do it. And you figure out a lot about what's hard about things. And some of these ideas we keep coming back to over and over again. So the next thing that you went on from Crowd to join was Indeed hiring events. And so tell us a little bit about that journey for you and where the product is today.
Yeah, so I joined hiring events about a year after it had already been around and it had already gained a lot of momentum. So hiring events was essentially this concept that kind of existed, and I think Ryan Arroyo and Naveed saw that people were posting these events, essentially these like one-on-one where companies would hold their own job fair and people could show up and get an interview directly on the spot. And they said, what if we actually took this thing that's already happening in the world and turned it into a product and got other companies to use it? And so what it is now, or what it's been, at least when I was on it, was basically companies would create these events and we would create these pages that allowed users to RSVP directly to the event without having to apply to the job. And then they would just show up at the time that it was set, at the location that was set, and be able to have interviews directly on the spot. And so it was this, they were able to fast track a little bit and go straight to the interview rather than going through the application process and waiting to hear back to set up an interview. And so it was really streamlining us directly to the interview. So that is what hiring events is. Sorry for not defining that ahead of time. And so we still had a lot of learning to do. I think even when you see products that have a lot of momentum, there's still a lot of work to be done. I know that team is still adapting a lot to the new circumstances with the pandemic. And at the time that I had worked on it, I was focused on like, how do we better understand how these events are happening, and how can we at Indeed even be more involved with not just sending people to these events, but helping them manage these events, creating, or at the time there was a sign-in tool, building on top of that sign-in tool to make it more compelling. So we knew who was getting interviewed. We knew who to follow up with. And so ran a lot of experiments in that space, and just trying to learn how we can even continue to grow and evolve this product and not just say, awesome, there's a lot of adoption, we're getting in a lot of revenue, there's a lot of traction, we've done a great job, and so this is the product as it exists now. And because I think that team has done such a great job with learning how to continuously evolve and adapt, they moved so quickly when this pandemic hit to spin it around and turn it into virtual hiring events. And I think that's a very extreme but still necessary case of you have to evolve and not just get comfortable with where you're at, but recognize you'll need to continuously adapt. And I think that's why hiring events is continuing to do so well, even in this pandemic.
Yeah, so we had Ryan Arroyo on an earlier episode talking about that transition, and it has been really amazing to see how just by doing this work and focusing on getting people to show up at an actual specific agreed upon time and then have a conversation with another person. There's a huge amount of work that went from just getting people to apply to jobs to actually getting to show up, but it's opened up this huge set of opportunities, and hiring events is one of the fastest growing new products of Indeed over the last couple of years, and virtual hiring events has been truly amazing in terms of what we can do to actually bring people together on our platform. It's another great example of that type of project that I mentioned before that I love. When the idea for hiring events has been around for at least 10 years, I've been hearing about people talking about this, and to me it always seemed like not such a big deal. And Ryan, and then especially Naveed's passion about getting this project off the ground. We bet on that passion and the idea, and it turned out to be such a tremendous opportunity. And I love when the best ideas are ones that I have no idea how good they are, and that we were willing to take a bet on that. So after hiring events, you moved on, and that team is still going, and that's one of the examples from the incubator that ended up getting acquired by our enterprise team and is now a real product with quite a significant investment in it. You went to go work on something new, and you mentioned this before, working on text to apply. Talk a little bit about where that idea came from and what text to apply is and where that went.
Another reason why I love working on the incubator is that I've been on the team for 3 years and I've gotten to work on vastly different things. And so, I worked on crowd and hiring events where these products, when I had joined, had already existed and had various things that was already proven to get to the point that they were at. Text to apply was cool for me because we were building from the ground up in this really different space than what I think Indeed is used to being in. And so starting with the idea, that came from, I know I mentioned earlier, this amazing woman who came from sales, and she's been at Indeed for, I think, about 5 years now, Brittany. And she pitched this idea to the executive team, and it got funded. And so it started, I believe, in July of last year. So it's a little over a year old now, or it might have been April. But it's kind of what it sounds like, which is basically you have the ability to use SMS to apply to a job. And Brittany got this idea because she, working in sales, heard from a lot of her clients that they wanted something like this, or that they even assumed Indeed, given its size, had something like this, because there's other products on the market where some form of this exists. And so they were coming to her saying, hey, do you have something like a text application? We want to put up signs in our stores. And she would, I mean, we didn't. So that's where the idea was born. And I think another great example of where you have all these different people that work in these different areas across the company that just see problems that we don't necessarily see. And here there was this solution that clients wanted. And so we had such a fun time actually starting it off, because we were truly very, very scrappy. Our first 3 months of funding, we knew we had to move quickly. There were various obstacles that we had to face. The first being that texting, while not new to Indeed, we had various like text notifications, two-factor authentication in place. The idea that there would be this back and forth text message interaction that led to an apply was a really scary thing for legal, given that each text infraction could cost us $500 per infraction. And so our first thing was, okay, what can we do as we continue to work with legal to get to a point where we can get this product where they feel comfortable having us roll out with it? What can we do quickly in our first few weeks so we can have something that's out there, so we can just even figure out if anyone is going to text a phone number with a keyword and see if they're like, we're telling them, hey, you should apply to this job by texting to it, if that's even something that happens, because we had no idea and no data around that at all. And so because we both live in Austin and she had a few clients in Austin who are willing to try it out, we roped some clients into trying out this product for free. And we actually got some big names. We had like Taco Cabana, we had Buc-ee's, which for those who are outside of Texas is this massive gas station chain that has almost a cult following in Texas. And so we had several clients we were working with, and we worked with a local vendor to print signs. We actually drove around to the different locations of the clients that we had agreed to pilot this in Austin, and we put up the signs for them because we had learned in our first round that just dropping off the signs was not going to get them up in a timely manner. And we had 3 months to work on this. We needed data fast. And then while legal was working on figuring out what is the most effective way and the safest way that we could send more than one text message, we said, let's just implement a version of this where they text it and then they get a link to the job. That's actually a huge thing in where a lot of other text to apply like products that exist. It's just a link to the job, and then you click on the link and then you go through the job application. So that's where we started, because we just wanted to know if people would text. And I remember we were very eagerly watching the dashboard when we had first put up the signs and celebrating when we saw that there were text messages rolling in. And I just love that story because, you know, we think about Indeed as this massive company, and here we are just two people running around getting signs up in Austin and kind of being scrappy and being able to do that on Incubator and having that freedom. It was so much fun. And so we learned a lot in the first 3 months. We learned people are willing to text. Once we were able to get a back and forth flow going, we learned that people are far more willing to apply to a job if they can do the full application over text. When they started over text, we had completion rates of like 80% at that time. And I remember you saying, you don't see those types of completion rates anywhere. So it was cool to see that people were willing to do that. And we took that risk. It was 3 months of who knows if anyone is actually going to use this. When we put out signs in the world to, yeah, people will. And so let's get some more funding and figure out where else we can take this.
Yeah, no, it's been a really amazing journey, and in particular, as you said, you know, having someone involved from the start, who represents the client side of the business, Brittany had a very different kind of insight than a typical product manager would, and so she was actually able to lead the innovation there in a very different way. Then COVID hits, and Indeed as a whole takes a step back, and we're looking at everything that we're doing and saying, and that's actually where the genesis of the title of this podcast here, here to help. Like, what can we do to help right now? And so we took a bunch of different teams, and the incubator was one of them, and said, hey, let's put as many hands on deck as we can to helping out right now with what people need. And so you ended up working on jumping very quickly to work on something new. Can you explain a little bit about that project?
Yeah, and I think that's where having teams that are set up to pivot very quickly and build stuff very quickly was very beneficial for us as Indeed in being able to spin something out that could help. So the pandemic hit, and we said, let's pause a lot of the products and figure out what can we build to address some of the issues that were happening. And one of the things that we had seen was there were a lot of companies out there on their own trying to figure out how can they help the employees that they were having to furlough or lay off. And one of the things that was coming up pretty consistently was they were building these landing pages and saying, hey, we communicated with these different employers and said, you have the opportunity to have a fast-tracked application with them. So here is the link to all of these different employers who are willing to work with you because you came from, I'll use the example of like Cheesecake Factory. And then they also just listed all of the other jobs that they knew were hiring. And we were seeing that, and we thought, we are Indeed. We have all of the jobs. We have the teams that can spin this up very quickly. And especially also for employers who don't have the resources to create those pages. And so from the time that we started working from home and chose to pause a lot of the existing incubator products, we spun up a team of various engineers and some product managers, and we built out these co-branded landing pages, and we called it Indeed Next. And these gave employers the opportunity to essentially have a landing page within a matter of minutes where we would show jobs that were hiring in their area. If they already had formed partnerships with existing employers, we had the ability to link to those. It gave them the ability to customize a company message if there was information that they wanted to relay to their employees. And we also had the ability for a lot of the employers that were furloughing to turn on the notification so that anyone who used this platform to try to find another job while they were waiting for things to get to a state where they could start hiring back, that we would send out those notifications on behalf of the employers. And so it was really cool to see. I mean, this came to life within, I think, 2 or 3 weeks of us saying we need to do something, and let's take this thing that's already happening and spin this up. And then since then, products have started spinning back up, but I've been working for the last couple months on the evolution of that, which is focusing on what are the other types of services that we can provide in addition to just showing them what jobs are available. What are the things that we can do to help the job seekers that are in this process, and what are the things that they're going through that might be unique to their situation. And there's this other great team at Indeed that is run by the product manager, Emily Gipple, and she created this product that allows job seekers to have their resume reviewed by career coaches. And that was a really cool thing we were also able to leverage to give to these job seekers, where we subsidize the cost for a lot of the job seekers that were impacted, and taking it another step and not just saying, here are the jobs that are available and that are still hiring, but like, let's also help you get your resume in better shape so you can apply to these jobs more confidently.
That's great. So we're running a little long. I could talk about this stuff all day, but a couple other topics I wanted to get through before we wrap up here. One, the intro, I kind of talked about the different values that we have and how they're all interrelated. So can you talk a little bit, you've mentioned data quite a bit, but how the value of innovation is really works with our value of being data driven?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we've been doing on Incubator and what a lot of products at Indeed do is we form these hypotheses around, okay, we think that this will drive XYZ value to as a feature, or on Incubator as a whole product, we think it'll drive this value at Indeed. But none of that means anything if we don't have the data to then back up those hypotheses and confirm or reject those hypotheses. And so data is such a massive part of driving those decisions, because then we're able to know whether or not it's something we should continue to work on, whether or not it is creating enough impact to justify the resources and the people involved on it. So it's a critical part of it. And everything that we're doing, we're basically saying, I don't know, let's test it, and then let's figure out what to do from there.
So when you think about this whole concept that we've been talking about innovation and what it means, and how we've kind of systematized it and how we think about it here, how has that changed how you think about your own personal career?
Yeah, I've learned how to get really, really comfortable with failure, and almost reframing or rebranding the term failure into something that's actually really positive. Because if we're taking all the steps of taking the risks, using data to understand whether or not what were the outcomes of those risks, and deciding whether or not we should proceed, the failures are actually very valuable. And that was before joining Indeed. That was not something I was comfortable with at all. That was not something in my repertoire. I could not wrap my head around the idea that, not only should I be okay with things not working out, but I should be excited even when things don't work out. And that's been a huge part of how working in something that is so focused on innovation has changed how I perceive a lot of things in both my career and also in my day-to-day life.
So in the last episode, we had Julie Scully on, and we were talking about the data-driven value. And one of the things that Julie pointed out was that unlike putting job seekers first or pay for performance, which are to some degree clearly centered around our products, and there's some people in the organization who might not be able to think every single day about how do I put job seekers first. That being data-driven is something that everyone in the company can do. And innovation, we've been talking this whole time so far about our products, but it really is how we think about the business as a whole. How can we continuously improve? So how do you think about how anyone in any role anywhere can sort of live this value?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the first things is just being willing to experiment and trying new things. But then when you're experimenting and trying something new that you think you have an interesting hypothesis, whether that's related to something that's product specific or whatever it is you're trying to work on in your role, also don't be married to that specific idea, that specific solution. Work on gathering data, whether it's quantitative, whether you can have numbers to it, or qualitative, like even a few pieces of feedback from various people that you're impacting, and decide whether or not you should continue working on the new thing that you're trying, or if you should adapt and pivot or just stop from it altogether. And then also, as I've said numerous times already, just being comfortable when things don't work out and embrace that failure, because it's a huge part of taking risks and learning these new things. You don't know what you don't know, or you don't know until you try it. And so I think those are things that are applicable everywhere in all aspects of the business at the company.
To wrap up, the way we normally wrap up here is actually to look briefly kind of forward, especially over the last 6 months. There's been this incredible upheaval and challenge, and everyone is obviously looking forward to some return to whatever normalcy might look like. But you mentioned at the very start about this drive-in comedy show. Are there other things that you've been able to experience that have given you some kind of optimism for the future?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got to know this woman back in January from taking her dance classes, and she runs a small business in Austin where people sign up to take dance classes, and she runs performances too. And obviously that's been entirely impacted by the pandemic. There's no way that she can gather people in a room together to do these dances. And so the last few months I've been working with her on taking things virtual. So she is running everything online, dance classes online, even doing a virtual music video series. And she she doesn't have a tech background at all. So this has been a huge undertaking for her, something that was very intimidating. But I think she definitely has embodied a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, and just willing to just say, no more in-person classes for the rest of the year. I'm going virtual. I want to try and get this community together and recreate all of the feelings of bonding and movement, but doing it online. And she's doing trying a lot of different things, and not everything is working out, but then she'll just take on that feedback and adapt and pivot. And it's really turned out to be this really cool thing. And to be able to watch from the sidelines and work with her on that, I think has inspired me a lot and gives me a lot of hope for a lot of the tenacity and grit that we see in a lot of these people that are impacted.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Connie, for taking the time to talk today. Thank you so much for everything you do for Indeed and for job seekers all over the world. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Chris.